Hello, everyone. For those I haven't met yet, I'm Shannon Lukowski. I'm with OCFS in the Division of Youth Development and Partnerships for Success. In that role, I work with runaway homeless youth programs throughout New York State and also with the Safe Harbor New York program. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. If you encounter any IT issues with the presentations, you can email info@welfareresearch.org and help will be sent your way. If you have an IT issue during a presentation, you can type that issue into the chat box and one of us will assist you. If you encounter any IT issues with any presentations, they are being recorded and will be posted in the HSLC for future viewing. Certificates will be issued after the summit by request. If you need a certificate, please send your name and email address to Christine Anderson here at OCFS. Next week, we will send out a post-summit survey. Please use this opportunity to provide feedback about the event so we can incorporate it into future sessions going forward. Lastly, participants will automatically be muted upon entering each presentation. Each presenter has about 45 minutes of content, including an interactive activity, and will reserve about 15 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question or comment during the presentation, those may go in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We ask that you try to hold all questions until the end, and then the presenter will get to as many questions as time allows. If we do not get to your question, we do have the ability to see the questions after the presentation, and we'll get you an answer as quickly as possible. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Kelly McCoy. Kelly is the Community Engagement Manager and Internet Safety Specialist with Shared Hope International. She supports and manages volunteers, both locally and nationwide, serves as a community educator on domestic minor sex trafficking, and heads Shared Hope's Internet Safety Initiative. We are thrilled to have her with us today as she is a wealth of knowledge on this topic. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself there. My name's Kelly, and I am so excited to be here. Thank you guys so much. If you could just bear with me really quickly as I share my screen. Oops. All righty. And here we go. Oops. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I am so excited to be here, as I mentioned. I'm from Shared Hope International. If you're not familiar with Shared Hope International, we are an organization that fights against domestic minor sex trafficking. So our focus is really the sex trafficking of American youth. We focus on prevention, restoration, and bringing justice. And so with that, I'll go ahead and start. I know a lot of you guys already know what sex trafficking is, but because I'm a person that needs to hear something about 750,000 times before it sticks, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of review what sex trafficking is. So according to our federal government, sex trafficking is the commercial sexual exploitation of anyone through force, fraud, or coercion, or the commercial sexual exploitation of somebody under 18. And with that, force, fraud, and coercion do not need to be proved in a court of law. So a lot of people, unfortunately, have an idea that sex trafficking sort of looks like Taken in the United States, right? It's something that we love. We love our movies, we love our action, we love our drama, but unfortunately, that's not necessarily what sex trafficking looks like. For instance, a lot of times there isn't kidnapping involved, right? I feel like a lot of you probably already know this, but I had a peer-to-peer youth advocate say, it's not like kidnapping, it's like psychological kidnapping or mental kidnapping. And I thought that that was a really great way to put it. Of course, we know that traffickers a lot of times nowadays are using psychological manipulation rather than using physical violence in order to groom and control their victims, as they've seen that that's a more effective way. Of course, we know that because of many, many studies, I'm not sure exactly in your community, but across the United States, we're seeing victims typically start to be victimized in between 14 and 16. In my community, victims are typically seeing services around 15 and a half. So that's just something to keep in mind. So one thing that we really value at Shared Hope International is the idea that prevention starts with education. And that's kind of why I was invited here today to talk with you about our Internet Safety Series. So a lot of you guys know a lot about this problem from, coming here all week, if you have. And I really appreciate that. But there are just a couple things that I would love to go through. In my community, a lot of law enforcement officers say, where children play, predators prey. And it's something that, sometimes it could seem a little dramatic. But it is really true. That's what they use to chat with parents, talking to them about, hey, a lot of times before, traffickers and predators would have to come to, say, a park or a mall, or they would have to go to an arcade, they would have to go to a coffee shop, they'd have to go where they could find children or teenagers, right? That's where they would have to talk with them. But now, since teenagers and children are spending a lot more time on the internet, they don't need to go to arcades and parks and coffee shops, right? They don't need to attend those things. They can actually talk with children while children are sitting in their homes with their parents sleeping in the next room. So unfortunately, traffickers and predators are adapting to technological advancements and what our society as a whole has to offer. So we kind of see technology and the rise of technology as partially responsible for the explosion of sex trafficking that we've observed throughout our country and throughout our world, right? So we see traffickers not only, contacting kids through their phones, but also through their tablets, through their games, through esports, through Fortnite, right? And even through their school-given Chromebooks. So it's really interesting when we speak with law enforcement. A lot of times they tell us that it's not one or two tablets or phones or devices that they're taking out of a home. When there is a problem, they say they're taking probably closer to 12, 15, 20 devices out of each home when they are taking devices out of homes. So of course, I've got a few stats on here because I love stats. Who doesn't, right? So according to a study that we did a while back, we saw an 800% increase in youth online sexual exploitation within just 2 years. That is an enormous increase in youth online sexual exploitation, of course. And then of course, according to NCMEC, who you've seen during this week's presentations, they've told us that they estimate that there are approximately 750,000 predators online at any given time. So to me, that number is really scary. But what's scarier is to know that, say there's 750,000 predators in the world, period, right? You could say, well, those people, there's likely only a few in my area, and so they're not accessible to me. But because of the way the internet works, of course, I can speak with my friends across the world in a second. So all of these people are accessible in a way to any child, right? Because of the way the internet works. We also see, because of the research that Pew Research Center did, that 95% of teens have access to a smartphone. So one thing I want to say is that does not mean that 95% of teens have a smartphone. That means that they have access to a smartphone. So what I often see when I work with teens is that one teen will have a smartphone and the other mom will say, no, I don't want my kid to have a smartphone. They have a flip phone. I don't want them on social media, right? the teen that has a smartphone says, that's lame. You can just use my phone to post your Instagram stories on, right? So when we're together, you can use my phone to get on Instagram or get on Snapchat or WhatsApp, whatever app, right? And then we also hear that, let's see, what was it? Oh, never mind. I won't cite that because I don't remember. But also in an earlier research by the Pew Research Center, we saw that 60% of teens were using privacy settings on a specific app. I will say that that study was done in 2013 and that app was MySpace. So it's a little outdated, but I still included it in here because I thought that it was probably still the case after speaking with so many teens in my day. A lot of them are not wanting to use the privacy settings because they think I might be able to go viral, or maybe I'll meet my soulmate on here, right? They have a lot of different reasons why they don't want to use privacy settings. And it pretty much stays true that they're not using them all too much. Unfortunately, we are seeing that not only, you know, your run-of-the-mill online predators are using these apps, but we're actually seeing trafficking. So that's people spotting, people grooming, and actually people exploiting victims with the aid of the internet. Again, I know this is probably all stuff that you already know, but I think it's really important to remember. So we all know that teenagers have a lot of vulnerabilities, and a lot of the vulnerabilities that traffickers look like aren't necessarily age specific. So for instance, a lot of times folks who are more vulnerable to trafficking are Black and Indigenous people of color who are not in that category, LGBTQIA community, right? Folks who have experienced the juvenile justice system, folks who have experienced state care, folks who have experienced abuse, folks who have experienced addiction, and folks who have experienced houselessness. These are all vulnerabilities that we know about. But one thing that I really want to talk about is some sort of teenage specific emotional and mental vulnerabilities, sort of reasons why we think that predators target teenagers, you know, other than the obvious reasons, right? Reasons that make them vulnerable. So, for instance, we all seek love and acceptance, right? It's something that we are wired to do in our brains. It's a physiological need, right? We want to be loved. We want to be accepted. A lot of teenagers appear like they don't care. I was definitely one of them, where I didn't care what the homecoming court thought of me, right? I dressed weird. I was a weird kid. But at the same time, I still cared what my best friend thought of me, right? I wanted to be accepted and loved by my people, by my tribe. And I also cared what the waiter thought of me when they said, enjoy your food. And I said, you too. It's just something that we all, despite what we might show on the outside, have inside of us, is that we do want to be loved and we do want to be accepted by our people, by our peers, which brings me to the next point. We want to fit in. So, you know, just as our ancestors had tribes in order to survive, in order to have a sense of community, teenagers also have their tribes, right? We see that in the stereotypical, which lunch table are you going to sit at, right? Are you going to sit at the jocks, the cool kids, the nerds? It doesn't necessarily matter which tribe they want to fit into, but they're going to care what their group thinks. They're going to care what people who dress like them think, right? They're going to care what, for instance, if they see somebody at a coffee shop that looks like their type of person, right? They're going to want to make a good impression on that person. And then, of course, feeling misunderstood, insecure, and lonely. There's nothing more teenage than that. one thing that I like to bring up, and I'm so sorry, I'm totally blanking on the study, so I apologize for this, but I recently read a study that said the age that you least expect to walk in to a room and be accepted is 14 years old. So although a lot of us may still feel that way as adults, we might feel misunderstood or insecure and lonely. That age is typically the age where that feeling is most intense. And all of these things are things that traffickers can obviously use in order to manipulate people. So, of course, COVID-19, we've seen that COVID-19 has exponentially increased activity, exponentially increased talks online with predators saying this is a great opportunity. NCMEC recently put out a study in January where they told us that they've had more tips than they ever have, and that they've seen this onset of predators talking about how they could use this as an opportunity to traffic and exploit more children. So of course we see increased daily screen time. This is inevitable. Even if they're using their screen time to go to school, to attend school. I don't know about you guys, but I've yet to talk with a parent who hasn't caught their kid doing something they're not supposed to do while they're supposed to be at school. I know personally my nephew is watching Fortnite videos all day. My poor sister has to monitor him every day to make sure that he's actually doing what he's supposed to do, right? But even so, on the weekends, they're not really going out and playing with their friends as much. That's not really an option for a lot of families, right? And so they're not doing soccer, they're not doing extracurricular activities. They have so much screen time because that's a lot of times all they can do and all their family can muster up to entertain them, right? Like I said, we have decreased in-person social opportunities. So that would be like extracurricular activities and hanging out with friends, right? Decreased access to mandatory reporters. I'm sure that that's a huge issue that you guys probably know very well, but even, less families are going to, say, the doctor because they're afraid to go to the doctor right now. They don't want to be exposed to COVID-19. Less families are able to seek services in person with a mandatory reporter, where that mandatory reporter might be able to, catch on to some clues that child must not be comfortable, right, with their parents. We're seeing increased economic strain. And so we're seeing a lot of kids feel like maybe they have to provide for their family and looking for opportunity to even have their needs met. They still want new clothes and they still want to buy V-Bucks on Fortnite, right? They still want all of the things that teenagers want, even though their family might be in a tight spot. And then, of course, we're seeing decreased societal accountability. And what I mean by that is a lot of folks are unfortunately unemployed or are working from home. So that kind of goes along with what people who might, be exhibiting predatory behavior, they might not reach out to kids during the day when they're on their company server, right? They might not be talking with kids online when their coworkers are around, but when they're by themselves at home and they're not really able to go out, they're not really able to hang out with other people, then instead of just chatting with kids at night, after work, when they're alone, they're able to chat with kids and groom kids during the day when they would normally be at work, right? And then that, of course, goes with decreased access to healthy coping mechanisms. So people who might be fighting those urges to exploit children, or people who might be fighting pedophilic feelings, they might not have as much access to healthy coping mechanisms. And so they might turn to unhealthy, harmful, terrible coping mechanisms that are the reason why we're here today. So one of the things that, I really wanted to talk about today is some research that I did a couple of years ago. And it basically kicked off our entire internet safety initiative here at Shared Hope. We had a lot of parents that were calling in and asking about different apps. Hey, my kid has Snapchat. I saw in the news that it's terrible. Should I make them delete it? I don't know what it is. Tell me about it. I saw my kid has TikTok. Is it awful? We had a lot of parents asking a lot of questions. And so we thought, you know what, let's just put out a downloadable free document that parents can look at. We could point them toward, and we could tell them about different popular apps, and then possibly talk about some holes or potentially some safety holes, I guess, within that app. So some safety concerns. So what I ended up doing is I thought, heck, I'll do it. I'm the resident millennial, right? So I ended up creating a list after speaking with some of our colleagues in law enforcement, a ton of survivors, lots of teens who I work with, right? And so I created a list of apps that were common, but also apps that potentially had some major problems on them. So I created a list of 8 apps. I believe that list is an attachment. I believe you were sent that list, but if not, no worries. I will make sure it gets sent to you. But it included Instagram, TikTok, a lot of the usual ones, some of the problematic ones, right? Like, let's see, Kick, Whisper, things like that. And then of course, Calculator Plus. So I was just going to check out all those apps. I knew how to work some of them, but I wasn't necessarily sure about some of the other ones. So I decided I would download all of them and just poke around. I'd create a resource that talks about how they work, right? So parents could maybe go on and navigate for themselves what kids were actually using them for, because we know that sometimes the descriptions that the apps put online aren't necessarily the same as how people are actually using them, right? And then, of course, like I said, some potential safety concerns. As I was sort of creating these apps, I wasn't thinking that this was going to be a big research project. I was thinking it would sort of be a 2-day thing where I'd learn how to use the apps and sort of poke around and see what kids are doing, right? And, oh, that might not be a good thing in terms of features. Unfortunately, as I started downloading these apps, I realized that it probably wouldn't be super incognito to download the app as Kelly, the Shared Hope researcher. And so I ended up deciding I was just gonna be Kelly, same Kelly, but I would say my age was 15. At the time, I had these awful bangs, but they made me look a lot younger. So it actually worked quite well. So I just want to say, I went on there. I was not expecting to catch a predator at all. I was expecting to sort of check out how kids are using these apps. But what I didn't anticipate is that there were predators on there that were trying to catch me. So of course, within 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on the app, of me creating a profile as a 15-year-old and sometimes posting, hey, I'm new to this app. If someone could help me figure out how to use it, that'd be great. I was receiving, dozens of messages from middle-aged men. A lot of times they didn't even try to hide that they were middle-aged men. They weren't even trying to pretend like they were someone younger. A lot of times they would just initially open up conversation with a photo of their genitalia. Some were a little bit more sneaky. They would act really nice at first and then sort of move into a grooming process. And others would, ask something that might seem innocent to a teenager, like they'd love a picture of me in my jammies. But as somebody who works in this industry, I obviously know that their intentions are sinister. So really today, and what I learned from that is I immediately started to recognize the signs of the grooming process. The grooming process that I teach kids about every single day. And I was seeing it sort of unfold right in front of me, and to me. But the difference was the people I was talking with thought I was a 15-year-old girl. So today we're going to be going over some of these things that I saw and showing how they demonstrate the grooming process that we might all know so well. But we're sort of going to be looking at some of these screenshots of these real conversations that I had with predators, and showing how they demonstrated that, and really how they work. So with that, I want to go ahead and add a disclaimer. Obviously, since we're going to be looking at screenshots of real conversations, this could be incredibly triggering for people who have experienced something like that. So I do just want to give a moment to say, if you need to step out at this point, that's totally fine with me. I'm more than happy to do that. I feel like everybody's safety and well-being should be first and foremost. That being said, I will say that none of the screenshots that I chose are overtly sexual in nature, and I tried my best for them to be the least triggering conversations that I could find. So that being said, I'll give a moment for anyone who wants to log off, and then we'll go ahead and jump in. So one thing that we know about the grooming process, or the grooming period, is that it can take a little bit of time or quite a bit of time, right? So one thing that we'll say, we'll go ahead and start with the screenshot that would be on the right of your computer. So this person, I'll go ahead and read this. This person is asking where I live. He lives in Tualatin. I say I live in Beaverton. I'm up there right now. What part? What part of Beaverton? Oh, close to Portland, near Cedar Mill. That's rad. I'm right up by there. Want to hang? Right now, I just met you. This person I had been talking with for a couple of days. So this person is really moving quickly through the grooming process, but not as quickly as this gentleman to the left. This person is what I like to call a lazy predator, because they are relying on the fact that this person online, this 15-year-old, has already been groomed by another person. I do want to say that I was speaking with a colleague recently who lives in Minnesota, and she works with her state's safe harbor laws. And she works a lot with youth who have experienced sexual exploitation and trafficking. And when I asked her how many kids she thought out of the kids that she worked with had been groomed online, she told me 100%. What she also told me was that not necessarily all of them were trafficked online, and not necessarily all of them were trafficked by people they met online, but all of them were prepped and primed for exploitation because of experiences they had online. So we see a lot of these predators immediately, sending these requests. He's saying, hi, want to play? How are you doing? Would you be daddy's princess? To me, that's a little different than folks who just outright send genitalia. To me, I see that person as wanting the shock value. This person is actually wanting to engage in a conversation or a relationship where there are two parties involved in the sexual sharing, right? Other people who I didn't include on here are folks who I spoke with for a couple of weeks before they showed their true colors and true intentions. So really the grooming period could be a very short time or a very long time, is the, the point I'm trying to get at. So often we see predators trying to appear familiar in one way or another, right? I also want to mention that the apps here that I have screenshotted from, mostly all Kick and Whisper. Those are the apps that I saw the most overt predatory behavior on. And so that's what I chose to show today. So for instance, we'll go ahead and start on the left here. This person appears to be a 16-year-old girl speaking with me. I at first thought I was speaking with a teenager. She asked what my name was. I told her Kelly. She told me hers. How old are you? 16, 15, cool. She's asking to see me, right? And sends a picture of herself. After speaking with this person for a couple of days, it became very clear that this was not a 16-year-old girl. It became very clear after the photos of genitalia came, and that person said it was theirs, and that person was a completely different race of the gal pictured here, that this was not the person who I was speaking with. And so that predator tried to lure me in by saying that I'm this person that looks like you, that is around your same age, when clearly this is an older man. And that person didn't reveal that to me until a few days later, right? But at first, they're trying to appear familiar, appear to be someone that I would speak with and that I would get along with, right? Someone who might be part of my tribe, per se. In the middle, we could see that this person who called themselves Puppy, and obviously their profile picture is a puppy. This individual was one of the nastiest individuals I spoke with. And as I mentioned earlier, this person was actually the person who initially asked for a picture of me in my jammies. So again, I know it's creepy, but other people might think, why not? I told them that I was going to bed soon. They might just want to make sure it's me, right? If I were a real teenager. So, but this person ended up sending really violent pornography. But the fact that they presented themselves as a puppy, as something innocent, as something that I think most teenage girls are into, puppies, right? That really alarmed me. Then, of course, we'll see this fellow on the right, and you'll recognize this fellow a few times during this presentation because this person was a textbook groomer. One thing that he did was he would ask leading questions, and then when I would respond, he would agree with everything I said. So for instance, he asked if I played sports, and I made up that I used to play soccer, but I quit at the end of last year. What about you? He told me that he played soccer for a long time. He loved it. Oh my gosh, we're just the same. I played soccer too. What position did you play? I tell him. He plays the other positions in soccer, right? So this is something that we often see predators do, is sort of let somebody else lead the conversation. And then whatever they say, whatever the victim says, they're going to go ahead and say something similar. So of course, what we see next is someone trying to develop trust. And so here, this person's also going to try to appear familiar, but on a deeper level. So for instance, let's see. This person has 2 brothers, 1 sister, all younger. Oh, before this, I had mentioned my stupid stepdad. He asked, why is he so strict? In what ways? He's showing lots of interest in my life, right? So through this, he's trying to create a bond, which will later be the base for a trauma bond that he's trying to create, right? I tell him he's so strict. He's always getting on me about doing my homework. And then you can't see it on this particular screen, but he tells me that he has a stepdad as well, and that he often doesn't get along with him and he wishes that his mom would be with somebody else. So clearly this person is trying to develop a deeper relationship with me, right? If this person, a lot of other folks, for instance, offered to buy me gifts. So that's another way that they could build trust with me, right? But really in this stage of the grooming process, we see them trying to fulfill a lot of those vulnerabilities. So for instance, we talked about how teenagers particularly yearn for love and acceptance. Well, if you want love and acceptance, he's going to love you better than anybody else. He or she is going to love you better than anyone else. They're going to accept you exactly how you are and question your friends and family for not doing the same, right? If you want to fit in, well, guess what? This guy likes all of the same things that you do. And he also has a stepdad that he hates, right? You feel misunderstood and lonely. Well, that person's always going to be available to chat with you. And they're going to echo whatever you say in one way or another. They're going to mirror your language, right? So all of these vulnerabilities, they're going to fulfill in order to create this trusting, loving relationship that they could then manipulate. Some of these other quotes I have right here are just things that I heard a lot from other traffickers, or I should say predators who I spoke with. No one understands you like I do. You won't have to be alone anymore. Your life is hard and I'm going to make it better. These are all things that so many folks have said. So, of course, then there's the establishing secrecy. So what this really is trying to establish themselves as the BFF, as the number one person, right, in that person's life. So one way that they can do this is by sharing a fake secret about themselves, something extremely vulnerable, and then in exchange expecting sort of a secret back from the child, from the victim, right? Another way that they can do this is by establishing a secret together. So a lot of times that's the relationship itself. They want their relationship itself to be this shared secret, right? Something that nobody else has with them. So for instance, I mean, this works for many ways. Obviously, this fellow does not want to get caught talking to a 15-year-old girl in this way too, but it's also a way to continue the development of that trust. So here we can see, again, talking about my fictional stepdad, he had said, sorry, he's so nosy. Hopefully you're good at keeping me a secret, gorgeous girl. And I said, yeah, I'm an expert now. And I said, can you get in trouble or something? And he said, good girl. That's what I want to hear. No need for drama. By just talking, not really, but I'm sure he'd rather we didn't even chat. So do your best to keep me hidden. Don't want to even deal with it. So this is one of, I want to say, 4 conversations I had just with this guy about keeping things secret. There were other conversations that I thought might be a little better, but they were quite explicit. So I didn't want to add that here, so you guys had to see it. But again and again, he wanted our relationship to be secret, just for us, just between us, you and me. I won't tell a soul. So then we see an erosion of boundaries. So this is where the trafficker or predator is really going to test the trust and loyalty between themselves and the victim they have. This is kind of testing the waters. But in a way, it's also getting information that they could perhaps use as blackmail material later, and then use also as for a future climate of shame for them to sort of create that later on in the grooming process, right? So in this particular image, this person is trying to convince me, 15-year-old me again, to send them nude photos. So he says, my eyes only, baby, promise This is just you and me, no one else. I know you're shy, but I can help guide you if you let me. I'm going to stop right there because I want to point out something. The just you and me thing we just talked about, sort of this secret thing, right? He says, believe it or not, I'm one of the good guys, not here to hurt you. That's that development of trust, really testing that, right? Got to put a little faith in me, is what he says. And I said, LOL, yeah, I know. I just don't know if I'm ready to send that kind of pic yet. You know, maybe if I get to know you a little better, is that okay? And he said, of course it's okay, but I would love for you to try for me. I won't push you hard tonight, but I'd love if you could show a little faith, is what he says. Unfortunately, it's cut off. But of course, really testing that trust. Something that I saw over and over again is this also this pattern. Oops, not ready for that yet. Also this pattern of asking seemingly innocent questions at first, and then sort of pushing harder and harder to see how much information they could get out of the child and see what kind of conversations they could have with this person. That is really just divulging really private information that the teen or the child is probably not going to want to divulge, but sort of gets caught in this spiral of sharing information, right? So it starts off with something like, do you have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Have you ever had sex? How far have you gone sexually? This is something that could be a conversation with a friend, a teenage friend, right? This could be a semi-appropriate conversation between friends, right? But then also asking, do you watch porn? Do you masturbate? And then going as far as to saying, tell me about it. Really wanting to know about those intimate moments that you have with yourself, right? And then eventually they're going to want to send pornography and ask how that made you feel. Like we said earlier, some people skip to that step. But when we're talking the full grooming process, this is definitely closer to the end, right? So this is kind of where we see a predator switch from being a predator to a trafficker. And that's when they start using direct intimidation, right? So this is sort of where they use all that information that they've gathered, all the trust that they've built, all the secrets that they've shared, and then also the sexual experiences to really lower the morale of the victim and psychologically manipulate them into doing whatever they want, right? So this could look like if this person is close with them, I mean, in terms of geographically, if they're close to them, they could want to meet in person. Even if they're far away, they could want to meet in person, right? And at that point, perhaps sexually assault them, perhaps pimp them out or traffic them in person, right? But then we also see things like sextortion, which is another form, or it could be another form of trafficking, where, for instance, they have a nude photo of the child or the teen, and they use that in order to blackmail them, essentially, into giving them more violent or graphic material for them to use or sell on the dark web, or should trade with other folks who trade child sexual abuse material. They might, for instance, force them to be an online cam model or an online sex worker, getting them to create an OnlyFans account or something comparable, for instance. Or, I mean, some folks are so intimidated that they're able to be exploited from, even if the person is across the globe, or even if the person is in prison. They're so groomed and they're so manipulated by their trafficker that even when their trafficker can't physically come and get them, they still have that fear that their trafficker would be able to hurt them, right? So the reason you're not seeing a screenshot of this conversation here is because as an organization, we decided that I would not get to this point in the conversations with the predators for obvious reasons. We didn't go there. So what we will say is this is a quote that we were given permission to share by both the person who said it and the person who this quote is about. So for instance, this is an experience that we see as pretty typical in our experience. So they were threatening to go get her 10-year-old sister. They were threatening to go beat up her family, and they had taken photo of her being raped the first night and threatened that they were going to use video of her having sex with other men to show to her youth group and to show to her school. So you guys probably know a lot of these warning signs already, but again, I think it's great to talk through them and to remind ourselves about them, right? So becoming overly obsessed with online activity, that is every teenager just about, but it's really that panic when you can't be online that is something that I think we really need to look out for, right? If they're constantly on their phone, if they're not even willing to hang out with friends or family or be off their phone for just a moment, if they act like it's a life or death situation that they're on phone, that's definitely something to look out for, right? Of course, withdrawing from family and friends. I think withdrawing from family is super normal in teenage years. Withdrawing from friends is also fairly normal in teenage years. But if they're withdrawing from all friends and all family, that's certainly something to look out for, right? If they hide their screen or they put their phone underneath the table, even from their friends, that's also something to look out for, right? Because of course, you could hide your screen from your parents. I think most teenagers do that. But even if they're hiding it from their friends, I mean, that's probably a huge red flag there. And that's something that we've seen a lot as well. We've already said if they get unreasonably upset when they can't be online. Of course, if they receive phone calls or gifts from someone that no one knows, one thing that I want to say is that this doesn't have to be physical gifts. It's not like, you know, they have to have expensive jeans or shoes or whatever. This could be if they all of a sudden have a really expensive skin on Fortnite, or if they all of a sudden are buying a bunch of stuff on Amazon with what money, right? These could be digital gifts as well. So again, certainly something to look out for. And if they're being sent pornography, that is typically not normal for teenagers to send one another pornography. Perhaps there could be some humor in sending something odd, but if there is, or for a teenager, that might be considered humor. But if there's a constant sending of pornography that's graphic, that's something to be really concerned about, right? Then we also see these sort of secondary warning signs, sexting or sending or receiving lewd photos. Unfortunately, we know that about 1 in 4 teens engage in sexting, so it's not super uncommon, but definitely something to keep an eye out for. Unexplained absence from school or truancy, sudden change in dress or style. One thing that I always like to point out is that isn't just that they're starting to dress more sexually. A lot of times we see victims that are dressing in baggy clothes, something that would cause people to not look at them sexually because they don't want to be sexualized anymore. Overly tired or falling asleep in inappropriate settings. We know that a lot of kids are forced to stay up all night and chat with their exploiter. Withdrawn, depressed, or distracted, bragging about making or having lots of money, especially if they don't have a job, right? And then displaying expensive clothes, accessories, or shoes when they don't have the means to purchase those. So one thing that I always like to say is if you're a mandatory reporter, you just have to follow the mandatory reporting guidelines. That's it. It's super easy. I feel like a lot of teachers, especially that I speak with, get really overwhelmed with the idea of what do I do if I suspect that a child is trafficked. simply follow those mandatory reporting guidelines, right? And if you're not a mandatory reporter, or if you're not in a situation where you're a mandatory reporter, you can always contact local law enforcement and ask for the specific sex crimes division, just because a lot of operators might not necessarily take you seriously. And then of course, you could always call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children hotline. It's a favorite of mine, certainly works in my area. So that's actually where we ended up reporting everything that we saw during our research. And because of that, cases were opened all over the United States. So I'm a big fan of their hotline. So a couple things, I know I'm over time, I apologize. Just a couple of tools that I want to tell you guys about. We do have a tool called Intervene. It's an online course that has 4 modules, and it's specifically for service providers addressing the trauma experienced by child sexual exploitation. You can also get 4 CEUs for that, so that's really exciting. And through that, basically, we're talking about complex trauma. We're talking about interviewing folks who have experienced complex trauma and how you can do that without re-traumatizing them, while also identifying that they've been sexually exploited, because we know that unfortunately we can't just ask someone if they have been for many reasons, right? And then it also includes an intake tool that will help you to do just that, and just sort of give you some starter questions that are really strengths-based and, of course, trauma-informed. Then we also have a ton of internet safety, just free downloadable resources that you can recommend to parents. You can check out yourself. Basically, it all came from this research, which is that apps to watch for right in the middle. That's kind of what we created from that, where we do exactly what I said we were going to do. But then we also created all of these other resources from that, right? We have a comprehensive internet safety guide where we talk about sexting and gaming, and we talk about this grooming process, warning signs, a lot of the things we talked about today. We have a mini guide that a lot of times we share with guidance counselors at schools that they can go ahead and give to parents within their communities, that just gives them the basic information that they need to know. And then we have an internet safety series produced by myself, starring myself, where we talk about parental control options, things of that nature, as well as we just had our internet safety back to school webinar series, which you can view for free on our website. So I know I went a little over, but I would love to open it up for questions if anybody has any questions. Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you. There I am. I didn't see myself. Thought I was having technical difficulty. I just want to remind everyone, yes, you can email Kelly. That's her email address, but the Q&A is open. Again, it is at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type your questions in there. We do have time for them, or you can type them in the chat. The first is actually a comment somebody would like to share, that it is very scary hearing this now, even at 23 years old, and knowing about it, because when he or she, was much younger, they got lost coming from the grocery store to their aunt's house. They had seen an individual who they had seen earlier who seemed nice and asked if they were lost. They said yes. He invited me into his home where there were other people. Thankfully, he wasn't a predator and nothing happened, and I was able to just call my mom to get the address. Unfortunately, this is not the case for many other youth. Well, we are glad you made that out safely.
Absolutely.
That brings us to the point where it's so there's this weird paradox where we don't want to teach our youth, especially I'm a parent of a teenager, they've heard me say this all week, teaching her not to not trust anyone and that everyone is bad and out to get you, but the balance between really trusting your gut. If something seems wrong, it probably is. And giving her I don't like to use the word fear, but awareness, I guess, is a better word, without frightening them. Somebody would like the link to intervene, which we can send out with the materials next week. Wonderful information, both as a professional and as a mother of teenage daughters. I second that, Marissa. How common is the child trafficking that we hear about in parking lots of Walmart? This is a great question because you see all these stories on social media, like, watch out for the van with the blacked out windows in the Walmart parking lot. From your knowledge, Kelly, and your professional experience, how common is that actually, would you say?
I would say that it's not very common at all. And I mean, it's certainly something to look out for. I think that we all want to keep our kids safe in every single situation, right? But I would be much more weary of those personal relationships that we talked about, because it's very, very uncommon that people who are being trafficked are kidnapped in that traditional way. Like I said in the beginning, it's more of a psychological manipulation that we see, a relationship that's built and then exploited. So I would say that's far more common, and I think most survivors would agree with that as well. They kind of taught me that, so I want to give them the credit for that. But I think it's
absolutely, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I am a mom of young children pre-technology, and I work in law enforcement, supervising human trafficking victims. Hold on, my screen keeps flashing. I am not aware of many of the apps being used. Is there a list of these apps? They can get that right on the website, right, Kelly?
Yeah. So I can also, just the apps that I initially researched were Kik, Whisper, Yubo, Omegle, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and Calculator Plus. But I'm doing more research now that's a lot more structured. Like I said before, I wasn't expecting it to be a large research project. And I do want to say that there was law enforcement involved in the conversations. After we saw sort of what this research was going to become, we looped in our local law enforcement. So I wasn't just going rogue as a random nonprofit worker, right? I was definitely working alongside law enforcement. And as we continue the research on different apps, they're going to be even more involved in more regulations, and I'm not going to be Kelly anymore online.
And I think that brings up a great point. I just want to reiterate that we here at OCFS, we do not encourage, we do not expect, or we do not want you to go out and like go rogue and do like an undercover investigation. Our program just doesn't have the capacity for that. We rely on professionals like Kelly and her capacity to work with law enforcement, and then they relay that information to us and we can use it to frame our work. So that's a great point. And having law enforcement involved, I imagine, is very essential for your own safety.
Well, and I do want to just encourage you further with that. Like I said, I wasn't going in trying to catch predator. I was just trying to pop around different apps and kind of see how they worked. And so I made a lot of mistakes at the beginning. And, sort of as we were getting law enforcement involved, I realized that basically I could be tracked on one of the apps because I had used something that was an identifying feature, and one of the predators who I was speaking with actually found my Facebook. So
wow.
Yeah, like I said, it was really spooky, and we've made a lot of changes since then, since now we're going into this research project knowing what it is. And I would highly recommend not doing it unless you have law enforcement involved.
For sure. A couple more questions. And this is a great one. How can we help a child see that the attention they are getting is grooming? They are so much just kids who are seeking attention and validation. And we see that so much. Many of our victims already are the most vulnerable populations, and they're seeking that attention. How can we clarify them the difference?
Yeah. I honestly, I'm still working on figuring that out myself. And I think that it's different with every child. A lot of times, if they do have loving parents that could have conversations with them about, or I should say loving caretakers, not just parents, because we know a lot of kids have caretakers that are not their parents. But if they do have loving caretakers and adults in their lives that can have conversations with them about how to spot that predatory behavior, really just talking to them about, figuring out somebody mirroring your conversation or mirroring your words, right? Somebody asking you questions like we saw in the presentation earlier, and then answering the question after you already answered the question and saying the same thing that you said. That should be a red flag for a lot of kids. But a lot of times their frontal lobes aren't all the way developed. We know that. We know that they can't, necessarily make the best decisions. And I mean, even as somebody in their late 20s, I'm still working on making the best decisions. And I know a lot of folks who would admit to still working on making the best decisions who are much older and wiser than I. But I think that personally, I'm way into conversation. That's sort of why we created the Internet Safety Guide, is to guide caretakers through those conversations. So I would recommend checking out sharedhope.org/internet safety for some tools, but honestly, it's different with every kid, and I think we're still figuring it out. I do also want to say that we do have resources for youth coming out very soon.
Oh, great.
Most of our resources right now are for adults, but we have resources for youth coming out very soon as well. And I know that NCMEC has some great resources for youth as well. So always want to plug them.
They were here Tuesday, so.
Yeah, Washington Trafficking Prevention does as well. They have a zine about it, and it's awesome.
Oh, that's great to know. We'll include that information in our materials. Have you encountered any female predators online while you are conducting your survey? That's a great question.
Personally, I didn't. I encountered predators who posed as females. You guys saw that one example that I was talking about somebody who said that they were a 16-year-old girl and then, eventually said, I'm not, and exposed themselves as not being the same person in the picture.
Right.
But personally, I haven't had conversations with female predators that I know of.
How about, did you experience any grooming that was being done, like peer-to-peer grooming? I know that's something we learned about earlier in the week that I had actually never even thought of.
That's a great...
A prior victim is now grooming new victims.
I wouldn't necessarily say I experience victims grooming victims. Okay. I will say that I experienced kids exhibiting grooming behaviors, like for instance, or I'll say behaviors that could make grooming easier for a predator. So for instance, on one of the apps, I believe it was Yubo, they have a video chat feature where you can be in a chat room. And I entered a chat room and there were a bunch of kids in there and they sort of were egging this girl on who looked to be about 14, 15. And they were trying to get her to show her breasts. And the way that they were trying to do that seemed pretty predatory to me. So perhaps they could have been victims previously, but it didn't necessarily seem to be like a victim offender intersectionality situation. Okay. But it did seem predatory.
Do we know what percentage of these grooming relationships turn into in-person relationships versus staying online?
Gosh, I wish I did, but I don't. I can look into it for you.
Great.
I could certainly look into it. Unfortunately, I mean, there's still a lot of research being done on this because it is sort of a newer phenomenon.
Yeah. How can we as social workers, childcare workers, social service workers, parents, citizens of the world shut these sites down?
Oh my gosh. Well, I will say this. I don't ever want to hate on any app specifically. There are apps that I find totally dangerous. I'll just say Kick and Whisper, like I said, were just cesspools, in my opinion. But a lot of these apps also have really great features about them and could help kids express themselves in a healthy way. I would just say, personally, I would say check out the Earn It Act. You don't have to like it, but it's something that's on the ballot, sort of, or not on the ballot, but it's being discussed right now by Congress and by the House. So certainly check that out. That could be something that you would want to support. It's really keeping tech companies accountable. It's sort of an amendment to FOSTA SESTA. So
Okay.
I mean, I would say check that out. But really just contact your lawmakers. Tell them that something needs to be done and put that pressure on them. It's definitely something that we've seen lawmakers see as a way they can get some points from both sides. Every lawmaker wants to say, I'm protecting kids.
Right.
And so sort of leveraging that, especially in an election time, could be really effective. I would also say we have a resource on our website where you can go ahead and see if there's any laws that we support through our grading curriculum. We have a grading curriculum for each state where we grade each state on how well they're fighting sex trafficking. So you can go on our website, and through that curriculum, we choose laws that we support, and through that, you can actually go to, I think it's called our advocacy center, and you can put your name, email address, and zip code in, and it will autofill an email or a tweet for you. Okay. So you can tweet to your senator, your lawmaker, about whatever bills are going on. And of course, research those bills, see if you like them too, the ones that we support as an organization.
Awesome. We have one quick comment and then a question that we'll close up with. Somebody says taking access away when they finally share something with you is a really strong way to make sure that the next time they will not share with you. So I think that's something we've discussed early in the week and a very valid point on how our reactions.
Totally agree.
It's hard for sure, but teaching skills and in keeping that open door policy to talk about things is something that they try to promote. Yes, that's so important. And lastly, many teenagers don't believe the warnings that are given about predatory behavior. Do you think educating youth in group settings is best?
I would say I've had more success in smaller groups, personally. So again, this is not coming from research, big research necessarily, but this is coming from my personal experience. If we're in a small group and we can have a discussion and we can talk about times that creepy people have spoken with you, or times that people have sent you pictures, or times that, things have happened that have sort of given you the heebie-jeebies, as I like to say, I think that that's a lot more effective because we could be honest about the experiences that we've had. A lot of times youth particularly feel really ashamed about messages that they've gotten, about being wrong about people who they've spoken with online, about sort of the creepy predatory behavior that they've encountered because they feel like they've done something wrong or they've done something to, deserve it. Which of course is not true. At least in my opinion, it's not true. You never deserve to be exploited. You never deserve to be made feel uncomfortable. So I feel like small groups sort of foster better conversation. And through that, there's a little bit more honesty and a little bit more openness to, really listen to what the adult in the room is saying, because it's on their mind and they realize that it's not just them, it's their peers that it's happening with as well. I also wanted to just throw out there that one of our recent webinars is actually about caregiver and community empowerment in terms of internet safety. And I totally should have plugged it before while I was answering that question, and I didn't. But anyway, it's already recorded and it actually does answer that question really nicely. There are 4 experts on it. And I am, oh no, am I frozen?
A little bit.
Okay, well, that's all right.
But we can hear you beautifully.
Okay, great.
And there you are, you're not frozen anymore.
Yeah, so I'm just facilitating the conversation so you could hear from 4 other experts who, probably know what they're talking about a little bit more than I do in terms of community empowerment because of their positions in the community. So I would definitely check that out.
And our very own Madeline from OCFS is participating in a webinar on Friday. So if you can tune into that. Mm-hmm. She's the head honcho here and inspires all of our work. Kelly, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. This was so informative. All the materials that Kelly recommends and Shared Hope has to offer, we will distribute to you next week. So keep your emails on your lookout. That made absolutely no sense. Sorry, guys. I needed another cup of coffee, apparently. But you know what I'm trying to say. Be on the lookout for that in your email is a much better way to say that. Kelly, once again, thank you. Coming to us from the West Coast. All of you, thank you for participating again, once again today. Great questions, great interaction, and we look forward to another fun day with all of you tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Be well.